Hello folks, welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars channel where we have something quite exciting lined up. We've just had a sneak peek at a scene from Ridley Scott's new Napoleon movie, and it's a big one. It's only the coronation scene, one of the most anticipated scenes of the entire movie. There's a lot for us to deconstruct and a lot to talk about. I'm still trying to process everything, and I've seen it 3 times now. I'm still not sure how I feel about it, but let's take a look and then we'll run through and break it down. So this is the coronation scene from Ridley Scott's 2023 film, incoming film, Napoleon.
May God affirm you on his throne,
Nice.
and Christ give you to rule with him in his eternal kingdom.
I found the crown of France in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword and cleaned it and placed it atop my own head.
Okay. I mean, all of that did, well, the quote didn't happen, but the crowning himself happened, but the tone of the voice.
Glorious,
Oh, that's nice.
the most august Napoleon, Emperor of the French, is crowned and enthroned. Long live the Emperor! Long live the Emperor!
It does look great.
Long live the Emperor!
He doesn't look happy, does he? Okay then. Well, there's a lot for us to take apart there. Yeah, so the fourth time I'm seeing it, I still have questions, many questions. So let's rewind a little bit. What's the context to this scene being made public? Well, last week, as part of an interview with Ridley Scott and the wider production team behind the movie, Deadline Hollywood showed this clip, which you can also access on their website as part of the whole interview. So that's where it's come from. It's not a leak. It was legitimately shown, and so you can go and view it. So there shouldn't be an issue with it going out on this channel. If it gets a copyright strike, then I guess I'll have to take this video down, but we'll deal with that when we get there. Let's go through the whole thing and break it down sort of piece by piece, because there are some bits that I like, and there's a big kind of question mark hanging over the whole thing that I'm hoping isn't going to be quite as much of an issue as it appears. So here it is coming in for the second time. See, nope, let's rewind that ever so slightly. Straight away, I want to know who that guy is. And I've spent a couple of hours going through the IMDb list of actors trying to work this out, and I can't. I don't think it's Barras. There's no reason why it should be Barras, quite frankly. I wonder if it's Murat, but partly because of the flamboyance of the uniform. Although, to be fair, if it was actually Murat, they should probably have stuck a couple of ostrich feathers in there, because that was just Murat doing Murat. I wonder if they're sort of the reason I think it might be Murat is partly the ostentatious uniform, and partly I wonder if they're trying to sort of big up some kind of rivalry, but it doesn't really work because Murat was really key in helping save Napoleon's coup. He helped bring in the troops. So it would be artificial to put that kind of rivalry in the sense of maybe Murat's jealous because he wants to be emperor and leader of France, but that wasn't really the case. And by this point, I mean, Murat marries Napoleon's sister in 1800, and the coronation happens in 1804. So by this point, he's well embedded into the Bonaparte family. I don't think it's meant to be Josephine's lover, Hippolyte Charles, mainly because the uniform seems wrong. But as I said, I've been through the IMDb list and I can't work out who it's meant to be. It's perplexing me.
May God affirm you on his throne, and Christ give you to rule with him in his eternal kingdom.
I like this. So, for those of you who don't know the history, this is Pope Pius VII. I'm not sure who's playing him because Pope Pius isn't listed in the IMDb list, so sorry about that. Pius had a really difficult relationship with Napoleon. There's basically a power struggle between the two of them because Napoleon stripped the papacy of the Papal States, which, as you can imagine, didn't go down too well. And the Pope was effectively his hostage. So, they're not the best of friends. Pius never actually approved of Napoleon's eventual divorce of Josephine and snubbed Napoleon's marriage to Marie Louise of Austria. The quote that they use is absolutely on point. So credit there. From the sources, we know that he said, "May God confirm you on this throne, and may Christ give you to rule in his eternal kingdom." And I think you can hear some of the friction between Napoleon and Pius in there with that pause, his eternal kingdom, kind of that bit of a kick in the nuts for Napoleon of, you might be the emperor of France, but God's the one who rules for eternity. You're only here for now. So just trying to bring Napoleon down a peg or two. And I think that's coming across quite neatly. In comes the crown, of course. And the big scene that everyone's expecting. I think that moment is really nicely done. That gasp. I think that's really kind of making you stop and appreciate how much of a big deal this is. I think a lot of us are probably aware, if we're fans of the period, that this was a very different way of doing things. And look, I'm going to crown myself. Nobody does that. And Napoleon's decision to do that was about sending many messages. But in the process, it does make everybody else go, "What the hell?" And that's coming across very strongly. Keep watching because we're going to see another indication of this in just a sec. Look at Vanessa Kirby's face as Josephine. There are really strong, "what the bloody hell are you doing?" kind of vibes coming out of her across this scene, actually. But I think the strongest kind of sense of shock probably comes from Vanessa Kirby. She seems to kind of demonstrate that more than anyone else. Just a side note about the crown, it's known as the Crown Napoleon. And they had a bit of a problem because Charlemagne's old crown had been destroyed in the revolution because they'd obviously executed the king and abolished the monarchy. So they were like, well, we don't need a crown anymore. Melt it down. So that inevitably was a bit of a challenge when they had to decide what to do about what they're going to stick on Napoleon's head. So they created something that's known, as I say, as the Crown of Napoleon, that was made to look medieval. Let's watch a little bit more.
I found the crown of France in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword and cleaned it and placed it atop my own head.
So I mentioned last time the quote is a genuine quote, but it's actually from Napoleon's time in St. Helena, so during his second exile, looking back on his reign. So the quote is legit, but it's not from the time of the coronation. But I completely get why it's used in this moment in the film. If you were going to include that quote, you would probably do it now, because you're talking about the coronation, you're talking about how Napoleon sees himself and sees his rule. I don't really have a big issue with it being used here. Having said that, though, I can imagine that everyone who doesn't know the history is now going to be going on the social media platforms claiming that Napoleon made this speech before crowning himself, which this was always going to be the problem with people taking films too literally. But that's not the problem that I have with this. I'm just going to rewind it because I want you to just listen to the delivery with me and see what you guys make of it. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but the delivery is just making me ever so slightly nervous.
I found the crown of France in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword and cleaned it and placed it atop my own head.
Yeah, it's not the moment, it's the delivery. And you know what? It's not that Joaquin Phoenix isn't. It's not like he's a bad actor. He's not. He's an incredible actor. I think he's brilliant in The Joker. I think he's brilliant in Gladiator. He's done what was the film about Johnny Cash? He's got incredible range as an actor. So it's not as though his delivery is anything other than completely deliberate. And as a result of that, and it pains me to say this because he is so good and because I want this film to do so well, but people have mentioned kind of concerns about him being quite emotionless. I'm not bothered about the hint of an American accent that's in there. I'm really not, because whichever way you did the voice of Napoleon, you'd annoy somebody, right? If you went too close to reality, that would mean you'd have to be sort of talking French with a Corsican accent. Even if you then reverted to English, it would be English with a Corsican accent. And that might be historically accurate, but people would then question why he doesn't sound more French. Even though in reality, Napoleon never spoke French like a native Frenchman or woman. And throughout his life, he was noted as having this kind of thick Corsican accent. If you went with a French accent, that would just smack of parody. That'd be very easy to open the film up to kind of being something that was playing into crummy stereotypes, and it would probably annoy the historical purists. So I think whichever way you did this, you'd have people who criticized it. I'm not too bothered about the accents. Vanessa Kirby is going to sound like Vanessa Kirby throughout this, which means that we're going to have a British sounding Josephine with a sort of slightly posh air. Excuse me. So Napoleon's going to sound like Joaquin, and that's fine, with an undertone of an American twang. There are bigger things to focus on in film production than quite how your actor sounds. What's bothering me here is the monotone. And for me, I just don't feel that fits Napoleon's ability as an orator. I really don't. This is a guy who could inspire people, right? Fire them up. Think about his big, passionate speeches before battles. If you're capable of doing that, you don't sound like this in the big moments. You don't sound sort of almost detached and disconnected. You don't have that monotone. And when you look at the monotone, the lack of awareness, the unwillingness to conform to social expectations, the rubbing people up the wrong way by just being you, all of these things that we're starting to see not only in this 2-minute clip, but also in the trailers that we've seen and the featurettes that I've talked about. Add the angry outbursts, that cold detachment that appears to come through, sort of plugging the ears even with the sound of artillery. Put all of that together, and I wonder if what we're getting here is almost an autistic Napoleon. You can draw straight lines from all of those things that I've just mentioned to common symptoms of autism. And I say that as someone who is autistic, so I spend a lot of time looking out for the signs and then trying to cover them up for other people's benefit. So I wonder if that's the way that this is being played. Now, if that's the case, I think it's different. Depending on how it comes across, it might be inspired. Look, we've literally got 10 seconds of dialogue here. So we're trying to read a lot into a very small amount. It's definitely an interesting way to play him. I'm not sure it entirely works. From a historical standpoint, I don't think it's fair to Napoleon's range of abilities. That's not to say that people with autism aren't hugely skilled and capable of anything that they want to be in life, because that's not the case. As I say, I'm autistic myself, so I'm very bored of the stereotypes that keep getting sort of lobbed in the direction of people with ASD. But when you look at the different skill sets that Napoleon had, Napoleon could manipulate people ridiculously well. Now, if you're on the autistic spectrum, actually understanding other people's perspectives and their range of emotions becomes quite difficult. And I don't see that as being consistent with Napoleon, with his ability to really get inside people's heads. He did, when he wanted to, he had a really natural ability with people that is insanely hard if you're on the spectrum, believe me. So I don't think it works. I certainly don't think it's historically accurate. From a fan perspective, I think it's going to leave some moviegoers struggling as well. I didn't want to see an all hero or all villain depiction of Napoleon. I think neither would have been fair. But if this is the representation that we're getting, I think some people are going to struggle to get Napoleon. I mean, that's always one of the challenges for people with autism anyway. And I think that's going to affect how people talk about the film. But more than anything else, I want people to like this film. I want this to be a springboard for more productions like this. And if Napoleon is hard for people to engage with, whether they're trying to love him, whether they're trying to loathe him, or whether they're somewhere in between, I just worry that the film is going to become a victim of almost trying to be too clever and offer a take that's a little bit too unique but doesn't entirely work. Let's watch a little bit more. I must say, it looks stunning. Visually, it just absolutely pops. I'm sure there are some flaws with the costumes, but I think you put it all together and you feel as close as we're ever going to get to being there. This is a really nice touch as well. But yeah, as I say, in terms of the overall feel of the coronation, I think it's like the overall ambiance. I think it's as good a depiction as you're ever going to see. I paused it here because we've got just a lovely little nod. It's one of those little moments that I'm hoping are going to be dropped all the way through this film, that if you're a history nerd, you're going to absolutely adore, because they're just little nods to the reality and the history. So this is meant to be Jacques-Louis David, played by Sam Crane, and it's a nod to the painting that has inspired this scene. And we know it's inspired this scene because during that interview with Deadline Hollywood, Ridley Scott actually referenced the painting. He was saying that he is, never mind the books, for him, he's all about those visual depictions. He's somebody who learns through like photographs and paintings. And so these are the images that he has in his head when he's thinking about Napoleon. So he's kind of making that nod of how David has been the inspiration behind this movie for him. David's painting of the Coronation actually hangs in the Louvre if you're ever in Paris and you want to go and see it. And it literally looks like this scene. They've been incredibly faithful to that depiction. And as I say, visually, this scene pops. Sure, there's CGI in places. It's a modern film. There's going to be CGI in there, people. I've watched this back a few times to see if the CGI is obvious, and I wouldn't say it is particularly. There are a couple of points where I actually notice it. This being one of them. If you just look over the shoulder of the Grenadiers, I think that's probably a little bit of CGI going in there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a trick of the light. Obviously, the battle scene is going to be a completely different story. They don't have the budget to do, the Bondarchuk. Let's just get 500 horses and charge with them. That's not feasible, people. But overall, I love the feel of the scene. And I think it's important to just kind of sit back and enjoy the spectacle and let that kind of visual spectacle sort of wash over you. Suspend the disbelief for at least a bit of watching it. Just try and enjoy it, folks.
The most august Napoleon, Emperor of the French, is crowned and enthroned. Long live the Emperor! Okay,
so there's a necessity here of continuation. So they put Pius in for this kind of proclamation. Wasn't actually Pius. Literally, Pius said that quote that I mentioned to you earlier. And that's pretty much the bulk of what he does in the coronation ceremony. He's basically there as a witness. He even has to witness the civil declaration, and doesn't like that, because that's a kick in the teeth to his excuse me, his position as Pope. But they can't afford to keep kind of adding more characters and more people into this, so it makes sense to just keep Pius for that. I don't have an issue with it. We're going to get music in a second. There's an interesting kind of historical inaccuracy, but that's also sort of ever so slightly accurate going on with the music. Have a listen to this. So we had another close-up of that guy who I don't know who it is, who's sort of standing there and smouldering and seething and kind of giving Napoleon the evils. That clearly there's an undertone to and a context to all of this that will make that make sense. So we'll understand that in the fullness of time. If anybody knows who that actor is, can they please let me know? I would love to be able to just kind of post a quick addition in the comments and the descriptor to cover that off. But as I say, I've been through IMDb and I can't work it out. The music, though, so in reality, Giovanni Paisiello wrote a piece specifically for Napoleon's coronation. It was a Mass and a Te Deum. Now, if you listen to that and then you listen to this, you'll notice that they are different pieces of music. What they've used here, I think, is Haydn's Creation, the final chorus. And that was written, Haydn's Creation was written in 1797 to 8. So it's a nice contemporary piece, but it's got a very different sort of tempo and a feel to the Te Deum by Paisiello. And the reason I think they've gone with this is because Haydn's Creation has a more kind of martial, kind of aggressive air. The sort of, it's what musicians would call kind of staccato. Ba, 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 ba. No, I can't sing. You've obviously worked that out for yourself. Whereas the Te Deum is more, the technical term is kind of legato. It's more kind of smooth and mellow, and everything, all the notes kind of slide gently into one another. It's a much more peaceful piece of music, essentially. And I think Ridley's got the choice here, and he'll have his reasons. My gut is that he will have felt that this kind of works better with the type of Napoleon that he's bringing to the screen. And that's fine. I think it's nice that he's taken the time to identify a piece of music that is contemporary. So I don't have any big issues. When we watch the next section, I want you to keep an eye on Vanessa Kirby's face. In fact, I'm going to change the ratio on the screen so you can get a close-up of Kirby's face on this. There, that moment there. Hopefully you can see clearly enough what she's doing. But that look, I think, says a lot about the way in which they're going to play this moment, because she's visibly shaken. That's how she's playing it. You know, Josephine looking at this going, what the heck have I just witnessed? Because of the magnitude of, look, I'm going to take this crown, I'm going to stick it on my own head, and to hell with anybody else. This is my moment. And I'm wondering if Ridley Scott is building this sense of Napoleon almost becoming out of control, like he's a law unto himself. And that's fair to a point. You know, this was one of Napoleon's most arrogant moments. He was sending a massive message to everyone. He was deliberately snubbing the Pope in crowning himself. He is willfully making himself the most powerful guy in the room, demonstrating that he's going to do things differently and literally do things his own way. I don't have an issue with that. I think it's a point that's being made really nicely, that everybody around Napoleon looks at what he's doing and goes, the heck? Well, probably less polite versions of that. So I think the mood of the scene is good. It's the Napoleon thing, and it stays with us right to the end of this scene. Look at Joaquin Phoenix's face. We're going to get a close-up right now. There we go. Glassy. Glassy. You know, like the light is on and nobody's at home. And consider this for a moment, people. This is Napoleon's moment. He's spent years working towards this. Even if, I don't know whether or not they're going to have messed up with the timelines on this, but if they haven't messed with those timelines, Napoleon takes power in 1799. He then crowns himself emperor in 1804. So there have been 5 years leading up to this moment. This is the pinnacle. This is Napoleon right at the top. He's got all of the powers, everything that he wants. He's held the plebiscite even to get the approval of the population. Sure, that vote was rigged, but there was still the majority support for them, for the transition towards an empire, and therefore Napoleon's coronation. So this is very much Napoleon's moment, the moment where he can feel happy about things. He's got what he's after. Sure, enemies will gather and all the rest of that. That's not disputed. But this is a big moment for him. And there's no sense of satisfaction. There's no emotion at all. It's just completely devoid of emotion. And I'm not sure how this is going to play out over the entirety of the film. As I say, it's 2 minutes out of a 2-hour long film. There's also going to be the 4 hours director's cut that supposedly is going to Apple TV eventually. Certainly that's Ridley's plan. So how to sum it up? I think overall it looks great. There is really nice attention to detail. I think we're going to get lots of little Easter eggs for the historical nerds. I think that's going to be fantastic. I think as far as the historical accuracies go, they're either pretty excusable, certainly within this scene, or they're understandable within the context of a Hollywood production. The only way we're going to know if we like this delivery, I guess, though, is by going to see it. So Napoleon is in cinemas the 23rd of November in the USA and the 24th in the UK. So that's going to be it for today. Please remember to like and subscribe if you want to stay tuned for more Napoleonic content. I'll obviously do a reaction when I go and see the film myself. And if there are any other snippets, I think we're going to see a lot more dropping in the coming weeks. I'll be doing breakdowns and reactions and taking you through it all. If you're a fan of the period, if you want to bury yourself into the history of it all, check out my podcast, the Napoleonic Wars Pod, wherever you get your podcasts. But in the meantime, I'm Zack White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars TV channel. Take care, my friends. Stay well, stay safe. And as always, thank you for watching.